Amid the hustle of the square, a blind millionaire is stunned by a poor girl who precisely corrects his calculations. The video goes viral, revealing that the child was right and prevented a $1 million loss. Moved, the businessman changes his life and starts a project with her that transforms many futures. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Tuesday morning began like any other for Edward Miller. At 52, he still felt the weight of the darkness that had consumed his life 8 years ago when the car accident destroyed not only his sight, but also his confidence. Sitting in the back of his Mercedes-Benz, Edward nervously adjusted the fine wooden cane with a gold finish, a gift from his late wife, a symbol of an elegance he could no longer see reflected in the mirror. "Mr. Miller, we've arrived at Union Square," announced Charles, his driver for nearly a decade. The man's voice carried a comforting familiarity, but Edward knew that behind it lay pity, something that ate away at him. Edward took a deep breath, the expensive scent of his tailored suit mingling with the aroma of the park's blooming cherry trees. Even without sight, he could sense the movement around him, the hum of traffic, the chatter of passers-by, the chirping of birds. He put in his earpiece, and soon the voice of Maria, his personal assistant, echoed in his ear. "Edward, the numbers for the Upper East Side development are on your screen. Gross margin of 42%, net of 28%, Maria said, her voice always efficient and precise. 28% net. Is that correct? Edward questioned, walking slowly along the sidewalk, his cane guiding his steps. His real estate empire had been built on precise calculations, but since the accident, he depended entirely on his team. The feeling of vulnerability tormented him daily. "Yes, factoring in construction and marketing costs," Maria confirmed. "The contract can be signed today." Edward stopped near a park bench, feeling the morning sun warm his face. The fragrance of fresh bread wafted from somewhere nearby, mixed with the soft scent of flowers. He was about to confirm the deal when a small but confident voice interrupted him. "Mister, I think there's a mistake in that calculation." Edward frowned. The voice was a child's, a girl by the sound of it. He turned in the direction of the voice, trying to locate its source. "Excuse me?" Edward asked, confused. "You said 28% net profit, right? But you forgot the broker's commissions, which are usually 6% of the sale price, and the taxes on the sale weren't in the calculation either," the girl said matter-of-factly. Edward felt his heart race. Maria, on the other end of the line, had gone silent. Charles, who had been watching from a distance, discreetly moved closer. Do you understand financial math?" Edward asked, his voice betraying a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "A little. My mom cleans offices at a real estate agency sometimes. I sit and wait for her to finish and listen to the salespeople talk," the girl explained. "They're always talking about these numbers." Edward swallowed hard. His cane trembled slightly in his hand. And you think my calculation is wrong? If you didn't factor in the commissions, the sales taxes, the bank fees, and the projected inflation over the construction period, then yeah, the real profit should be a lot lower." The silence that followed was heavy. Edward could feel sweat forming on his brow despite the mild weather. Maria, still on the line, whispered, "Edward, who is this kid?" "Maria, redo the calculations, now. Include everything she mentioned," Edward ordered, his voice tighter than he intended. "But Edward, we already—" "Now, Maria." While he waited, Edward remained standing, trying to process. What had just happened? An unknown child had questioned calculations reviewed by a team of professionals. Worst of all, he had a terrible feeling she might be right. "What's your name?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Laura," the girl answered shyly. "Laura Smith. How old are you, Laura?" 10. 10 years old. Edward felt a tightness in his chest. When he was her age, he barely knew his multiplication tables, and here was a child questioning multi-million-dollar financial projections. The earpiece crackled again. "Edward," Maria's voice was tense. She's right. The actual net profit would be just 18%, not 28%. If you had closed the deal with the wrong projections." Edward felt his legs go weak. Charles immediately stepped forward to support him. "Sir, are you all right?" 18%, Edward muttered, more to himself. Not 28. He turned again toward Laura but could only shake his head, stunned. A 10 percentage point difference in a development of that size meant a variance of nearly $3 million. $3 million that could have cost dozens of employees their jobs, compromised future projects, and irreversibly stained his reputation in the market. "Laura," Edward began, but his voice failed him. He tried again. How can a 10-year-old girl know this?" "I pay attention to things," Laura answered simply, "and I like numbers. They make sense, you know. They don't lie." Edward stood motionless, processing not just the averted mistake, but the depth of that answer. Numbers don't lie. Unlike the people around him, who often spared him the truth out of pity, numbers were relentless in their honesty. For 8 long years since the accident, he had grown accustomed to people's condescending tone, to the "Don't you worry, Mr. Miller, and let us handle it." His mind flashed back to the day of the accident. He was driving late at night, returning from an important meeting when a truck ran a red light. The last thing he remembered was the deafening sound of twisting metal. When he woke up in the hospital 3 days later, his wife was gone and his vision never returned. Since then, he had built walls around himself, depending only on his trusted team. "Mr. Miller?" Charles gently touched his arm, noticing his boss was lost in thought. "Should I take you back to the car?" "No," Edward replied, still dazed. He took a deep breath, smelling the aroma of coffee from a nearby shop. "Is Laura still here?" "I'm here," the girl confirmed, her voice now a little more distant. Edward wanted to say something, thank her perhaps, or ask more about how she'd reached that conclusion. But the words wouldn't come. His mind was in a whirlwind, processing not only the financial error, but also the devastating blow to his pride. How had a man who built a $200 million empire on mathematical precision been saved by a 10-year-old child? Across the park, Robert, Maria's assistant, watched the scene with curiosity. Without fully realizing what he was doing, he discreetly raised his phone and started filming the interaction. There was something fascinating about the conversation between the city's most respected developer and an unknown child. "Maria," Edward spoke into his earpiece, his voice filled with urgency, "cancel the contract immediately. Don't sign anything until we've reviewed everything." "Edward, but the deadline is 5 p.m. If we cancel now, we lose 6 months of work," Maria argued, concerned. "I'd rather lose the opportunity than lose $3 million to negligence," Edward retorted. And Maria, "Look into this girl. Find out who she is." "That's unusual. Why?" Edward hesitated. How could he explain that a child had shaken his entire professional confidence? "Just do as I ask," he murmured. Laura watched Edward from a distance, sitting on the bench with her bag of fruit. She didn't understand why the elegant man seemed so upset. To her, math was simple. The numbers were either right or wrong. Robert kept filming and, on an impulse, posted the video to his social media with a simple caption, "Curious moment. A kid corrects a businessman's math in the park." In less than an hour, the video had been shared dozens of times. In 2 hours, hundreds. By the end of the afternoon, it had surpassed 50,000 views, and that night, when Laura returned to the small apartment she shared with her unemployed mother, she had no idea she had become a social media sensation. Much less did she imagine that her quiet life was about to be turned completely upside down. Laura woke to the incessant buzzing of her cracked cell phone on the plastic table. It was 6 a.m. on a Thursday that was starting just like every other day in her life, with worry etched on the face of her mother, Catherine, who had been awake for 2 hours trying to stretch their money for breakfast. "Honey, that phone won't stop ringing," Catherine muttered, her 43 years looking more like 60 due to sleepless nights. "Must be a problem with the carrier." Laura picked up the phone with trembling hands. The cracked screen showed dozens of social media notifications. Her account had been set up months earlier by a cousin. What she saw left her completely confused. Hundreds of messages, thousands of comments, and an impossible number of views on a video of her. "Mom," Laura called out, her voice barely a whisper. "I think something happened." Catherine came closer, still holding the mug of weak coffee that would be her only breakfast. When she saw the screen, her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Laura, what is all this?" Laura started reading. "You're a genius. This girl is smarter than most economists." But there were others, far less kind. Rude kid interrupting an adult. What a lack of respect. Laura's stomach churned. She couldn't understand how a simple math correction had turned into this hurricane of attention. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Edward hadn't been able to sleep. Sitting in his leather armchair, still wearing the previous day's clothes, he held a cup of cold coffee while listening to Maria report the results of her investigation into Laura. "Edward, I found some information on the girl," Maria said over the speakerphone. "Laura Smith, 10 years old, daughter of Catherine Smith, 43. The mother has been unemployed for 6 months, works odd jobs as a cleaner. They live in a small apartment in a housing project in the Bronx." Edward clenched his fists. A housing project in the Bronx, one of the city's most impoverished areas. "Go on," he said, a lump forming in his throat. "The girl attends a public school, always gets the best grades, but—" "Edward, there's more. The video has gone completely viral. It's past 500,000 views and is being shared on TV news programs." Edward's blood ran cold. TV news programs? The morning show on NY1 has already called 3 times asking for an interview. The reporter, Andrew Stevens, wants to do a story on the child prodigy who taught a millionaire math. "Edward, they found out where she lives." Edward shot up, knocking the coffee cup to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the room. "They went to her home. They got there at 5 this morning with cameras. The girl and her mother are being harassed by journalists. Some people are harshly criticizing the child, saying she was rude." Edward ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of guilt. This innocent girl was suffering the consequences of a mistake that wasn't hers. "Maria, I need to go there. Now." "Edward, I don't think that's a good idea. The press—" "I don't care about the press. A child is paying for a mistake she didn't make." 2 hours later, Charles was parking at the entrance to the housing project. Edward had never set foot in the projects, and navigating the narrow walkways with his cane was both challenging and humbling. The smell of food mixed with garbage, the sound of children playing. It all contrasted with the silent, orderly world he inhabited. He reached a small building where a crowd had gathered. He recognized the voices of reporters bombarding someone with questions. "Please, leave my daughter alone," a woman's voice pleaded. "She's only 10 years old." "Miss Smith, does your daughter plan to pursue a career in economics?" a reporter shouted. Edward approached, his cane tapping on the pavement. When the journalist saw him, the commotion grew louder. "It's the developer Edward Miller. Mr. Miller, what brings you here?" Edward raised a hand, asking for silence. His voice came out firm but laden with emotion. "I came to apologize to Laura and her mother for the trouble my team caused by publishing that video without permission. A child should not be going through this." Catherine approached, holding Laura by the hand. The girl was visibly frightened, her eyes red. "Sir," Catherine said, her voice trembling, "I don't know what to do. People have been knocking on our door since dawn, taking pictures of my daughter." Edward knelt to Laura's level, even though he couldn't see her. "Laura, I'm sorry. You helped me yesterday and I ended up hurting you without meaning to." "I just wanted to help," Laura murmured. "The numbers were wrong." "You did nothing wrong," Edward assured her, feeling tears welling in his eyes for the first time in years. "I'm the one who should have protected you." The reporters kept filming, but Edward no longer cared. He stood up and addressed the cameras. "I ask all media outlets to respect this family's privacy. Laura is a 10-year-old child who did not ask to be at the center of a controversy created by irresponsible adults." When Edward finally returned home, he found Maria waiting for him with a grave expression. "Edward, the video of your visit to the project has also gone viral. Social media is split between those who think you're a hero and those who accuse you of using the girl for personal marketing." Edward collapsed into his armchair. What else, Maria? There are groups saying this is all a publicity stunt. Some are questioning if the girl is really as smart as she seemed. And there's more. 3 networks want to do special reports. Edward clenched his fists. Refuse everything and hire security to protect Laura's family. Already on it. But there's something about their financial situation. Catherine is 3 months behind on rent. They're living on donations. The last full meal Laura had was 2 days ago. Edward, they're starving. Edward pictured the brilliant girl going home hungry. The mental image was devastating. A 10-year-old child going hungry while he lived in a mansion. I want you to transfer money to them, immediately. Edward, that could be interpreted as, I don't care, a child is hungry, while we're discussing public relations. Maria sighed. This will probably leak to the press. They'll say you're trying to buy their silence, or that it's just a marketing ploy. Edward stood up, walking to the window. Even without sight, he could feel the sun's warmth on his face and hear the sounds of the city, a city where brilliant children starved while businessmen like him lived in glass palaces. Then let them say what they want. I'd rather be accused of trying to clean up my image than sleep, knowing I let a child suffer because of me. The guilt consumed him. For 8 years since the accident, he had shut himself away in his ivory tower, surrounded by people who handled him with kid gloves. He had lost touch with the reality of millions of Americans who struggled to survive. And now a 10-year-old girl had taught him a lesson not just in math, but in humanity. Maria, I also want you to arrange for food for them, a full delivery of groceries, delivered discreetly, and see if you can pay their back. Rent. Understood. Anything else? Yes. I want a report on Laura's educational situation, what school she attends, if there are any special programs for gifted children in the area. At that same moment in the Bronx, Laura was hiding under an old table, trying to escape the sound of people knocking on the door. The tight space made her feel safe, away from prying eyes. Laura, come out of there, honey, Catherine called, her voice weary. Come eat something. Laura emerged, her hair disheveled and her eyes swollen. I'm not hungry, Mom. It was a lie. She was starving, but she knew the last slice of bread should go to her mother. Laura, my sweet girl, Catherine knelt, holding her thin face. These people won't stop bothering us. You can't even go out in the hallway. Laura hugged her mother tightly. Is it my fault, Mom, for talking to the fancy man? No, my love, you were just trying to help. The problem is the adults who turned this into a circus. Catherine sighed, peering through a crack in the curtain. Outside there were still people with cameras waiting. Outside a new commotion began. Voices were raised, people were running. Laura and Catherine looked at each other, afraid. Mom, I'm scared, Laura whispered. Me too, honey, me too. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a storm that would change their lives forever. The next morning, Catherine woke to the sound of violent banging on the door. It was no longer the polite reporters from the previous days. Now it was furious pounding, accompanied by hostile shouts that made her tremble with fear. Come on out, you grifter. We know you took money from that rich guy, a harsh male voice yelled. Your kids are fake. You set this whole thing up, another person screamed. Catherine rushed to Laura, who had woken with a start and was already crying softly under the thin sheet that covered them. The leak of Edward's bank transfer had happened exactly as Maria had predicted, but in a way far worse than anyone could have imagined. During the night, someone had hacked the bank information and posted not only the transferred amount, $50,000, but also a distorted version of the facts on social media. The narrative spreading like wildfire was that it had all been an elaborate scam, an ambitious mother using her daughter to extort money from a vulnerable businessman. Mom, why are they yelling at us? Laura asked between sobs, clinging to Catherine's thin arm. I don't know, honey. I don't understand what's happening. The situation had become a nightmare. Neighbors who once greeted them now looked at them with suspicion and envy. The news that they had received $50,000, a fortune by the community's standards, had created a hostile environment around them. Outside, the voices continued. $50,000. While we're here killing ourselves working, these two put on a show to make easy money. The kids, not even that smart. My son knows how to do math, too. Catherine felt her world crumble. She hadn't even touched the money yet. She was afraid to withdraw it, afraid it was some kind of mistake, afraid someone might accuse her of theft. And now she discovered that everyone already knew, that everyone thought they were guilty of something she didn't even fully understand. Meanwhile, Edward was in his conference room, facing the worst crisis of his business career. Maria had arrived with a pale face and a folder full of screenshots from social media. "Edward, the situation has spun. Completely out of control," Maria said, her voice tense. "The bank information hack was just the beginning. Now they're questioning all of your transactions from the last few years. There are rumors that you've done this before, that you have a scheme of using poor children for personal marketing." Edward's blood ran cold. "That's absurd. This was the first time I know, but the internet doesn't care about the truth. People are creating conspiracy theories about you being a predator, others saying your company only hires children to appear socially responsible. Edward, we've received 15 calls from clients cancelling contracts this morning." The businessman ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of a pressure he hadn't experienced in years. His company, built over 3 decades, was being destroyed because of a misinterpreted act of kindness. "And there's more," Maria continued, hesitating. "The IRS has announced they're going to investigate all your financial movements from the last 5 years. They want to know if there's a pattern of suspicious donations to needy families." "Suspicious donations?" Edward exploded. "I was trying to help a child who was starving." "I know, but now they're painting it as money laundering, tax evasion, or even worse, as payments to keep the family quiet about some alleged crime you committed." Edward shot up, his cane trembling in his hands. "This is a witch hunt. I did nothing but try to correct my own mistake." "Edward, there's something else you need to know. Laura's family, they're being threatened not just by journalists, but by people from their own community. There are reports that rocks were thrown at their apartment during the night." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward imagined Laura, a 10-year-old girl who had only tried to help, being terrorized in her own home by people who should have been protecting her. "My God," he murmured, "what have I done?" In the Bronx, the situation had become unbearable. Catherine had locked all the windows and doors, but that didn't stop the shouts from reaching them. Laura had a fever, a mix of stress, fear, and malnutrition that had weakened her small body. "Mum, I want this to stop," Laura said between shivers, wrapped in the only blanket they owned. "I want to be invisible again." Catherine's heart shattered. Her daughter, who had always been a cheerful and curious child, now wanted to be invisible. The attention that should have helped them had turned into a curse. "Listen, Laura," Catherine said, sitting on the edge of the makeshift bed. "We're going to get out of here. We'll go to your aunt's house upstate." "What about school, Mom?" "Forget about school for now. First, we need to be safe." But when Catherine tried to open the door to leave, she found people blocking the exit. It was no longer just curious onlookers or reporters. It was angry neighbors demanding their share of the $50,000. "Catherine, open this door," yelled Mrs. Davis, a neighbor who had always been friendly. "If you got rich off our backs, we deserve a piece of it too. You lived here pretending to be poor just like us," accused Mr. Johnson from the apartment next door. "How many other rich guys have you tricked?" Laura began to cry uncontrollably. She couldn't understand how her attempt to help a man with his math had turned into this nightmare. All she had done was notice that some numbers didn't add up, something that was as natural to her as breathing. "Mom, I didn't want this to happen," she sobbed. I just wanted to help. Why is everyone so mad at us?" Catherine hugged her daughter, but she had no answers herself. How could she explain to a 10-year-old that the adult world was cruel and unjust? How could she say that people preferred to believe sensational lies over the simple truth? Laura's cracked phone began to ring incessantly. They were calls from unknown numbers, some offering money for interviews, others making threats. Catherine finally turned the phone off, but that didn't quiet the noise outside. At that moment, Edward was on the phone with Maria, trying to find a solution. "Maria, I need to get them out of there, now." "Edward, any move you make will be interpreted as an admission of guilt. If you send security to get them, they'll say you're kidnapping witnesses. If you do nothing, they'll say you abandoned the girl after using her." So I'm in a no-win situation. Worse than that, I got a call from Child Protective Services. They're going to investigate whether Catherine is a fit mother. The argument is that she exposed her minor daughter to risky situations for financial gain. Edward felt his legs give way. They're going to take Laura from her mother. It's a real possibility. There are people online demanding an investigation for child endangerment and exploitation. Edward, they're using the situation to attack both you and her. This can't be happening. A child corrected my math in a park. How did this turn into a war? Because we live in an age where the truth matters less than the most interesting narrative, and the narrative of millionaire developer exploits poor child sells better than businessman thanks smart girl for her help. Edward collapsed into his chair, feeling the crushing weight of a situation that had spiraled completely out of his control. Everything he had tried to do to help Laura was, in fact, destroying her life. On the other side of the city, Laura had stopped crying, not because she had calmed down, but from sheer exhaustion. Lying in her mother's lap, she murmured softly, "Mom, I'm never talking to a strange adult again. Never, ever." Catherine felt tears roll down her face. Her daughter, who had always been brave and communicative, was closing herself off from the world. Laura's natural brilliance was being suffocated by fear and disillusionment. And worst of all, outside, the noise didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to be getting louder and more aggressive with each passing minute. Laura looked at her mother, her eyes wide with pure terror. Outside, the shouting grew louder, and someone had started hitting the door with something heavy. "Catherine, are you hearing me?" Edward asked, his voice tense. On the other end of the line, he could clearly hear the crowd and the banging on the door. I'm scared, Mr. Miller," Catherine replied through tears. "They're trying to break down our door. My daughter is terrified." Edward clenched his fists. "Listen to me carefully, Catherine. In 15 minutes, a black van will pull up on the street behind your building. Charles, my driver, will be at the wheel. Grab only what's essential and leave through the back, quietly." "But, sir, if someone sees us leaving with you, won't that make things even worse?" Catherine's question hit Edward like a dagger. She was right. Any move he made would be seen as confirmation of the conspiracy theories swirling online. But leaving them there meant putting a child in real danger. "Catherine, it doesn't matter what they think of me anymore. The two of you are in physical danger. That's what matters. Now." Outside, the situation had descended into chaos. A group of residents had joined the journalists, creating two factions, those who supported Laura and those who accused her of being a fraud. "Leave the kid alone, you jealous jerks," one woman shouted. "It's a sham, all staged," another voice retorted. $50,000, and we're here struggling to get by," a man yelled. Laura was huddled in the farthest corner of the apartment, covering her ears and rocking back and forth. A self-soothing motion she had developed. "Mom, why did people get so mean?" she asked in a broken voice. "I just said the math was wrong. Why is that so bad?" Catherine knelt beside her daughter, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "People get blind when they think someone has something they want, honey. It's not your fault." At that moment, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the apartment. Someone had thrown a rock through the only bedroom window. Catherine pulled Laura away from the shards, feeling panic take complete control. "Okay, now they're breaking our home," Catherine said into the phone, her voice hysterical. "Mr. Miller, I accept your help, but if anything happens to my daughter because of this—" "Nothing will happen," Edward interrupted, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "Charles is on his way. Stay on the floor, away from the windows." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Edward was facing his own storm. Maria had arrived with even worse news. "Edward, the situation at the company has become untenable. The board wants you to resign." Edward felt the floor drop out from under him. "Resign? Why?" "The cancelled contracts already total $15 million in losses. The banks are re-evaluating the financing for our projects. And the worst part, there are rumors. The FBI is opening an investigation into alleged money laundering through fake donations." "Maria, that's absurd. It was a single, compassionate transfer." "I know, but they're painting a picture where you've supposedly been doing this for years. They found some of your old donations to charities and are questioning all of them. Edward, they're building a case against you." Edward collapsed into his chair. In 1 week, he had gone from a respected businessman to a suspect in a federal investigation, all for trying to help a child. "And there's more," Maria continued, hesitant. "Your ex-sister-in-law, Patricia, gave a TV interview saying you were always weird around kids and that she always suspected you. She's implying terrible things, Edward." Edward's blood ran cold. Patricia had always hated him ever since he was married to her sister. She had found the perfect opportunity to destroy him publicly. "What kind of things is she implying?" "That you might have inappropriate tendencies with minors, that your donations were actually payments to keep children and families quiet about alleged abuse." Edward felt nauseous. That's monstrous. How could she make something like that up?" "Because she knows that in a situation like this, a lie spreads faster than the truth. Edward, you need a criminal defense attorney now." In the Bronx, Charles had arrived with the van, but the situation was worse than Edward had imagined. The small street was blocked by news vans and the crowd. There was no way to get to the back of the building without being seen. Charles called Edward. "Sir, it's impossible. There are people everywhere. If I try to get them, it'll turn into an even bigger spectacle." On the other end of the line, Edward could hear Catherine crying and Laura screaming in terror. Someone had started kicking the front door, and the flimsy wood was giving way. "Charles, I don't care about the spectacle. Get in there and get them out, now." But when Charles got out of the van, he was immediately recognized by the journalists. "It's the developer's driver," someone shouted. "Edward Miller sent him to get them." The cameras turned on Charles as he tried to push through the crowd. "Get out of the way," he yelled, but there were too many people. Inside the apartment, the front door finally gave way. 3 men burst in, followed by television cameras. Catherine threw herself in front of Laura, trying to protect her. "Get out of my house," she screamed, desperate. "You have no right to be in here." "Where's the money?" one of the men demanded, clearly agitated. "Where's the 50 grand? "I haven't touched it. The money's in the bank," Catherine answered, trembling. "Liar! You've already spent it all and now you're playing the victim." Laura was in a full-blown panic, screaming and crying uncontrollably. The cameras filmed everything, a 10-year-old girl being terrorized in her own home by furious adults. Charles finally managed to reach them, but by then there were at least 20 people inside the small apartment. "Everybody out," he bellowed, trying to assert his authority. "Look, it's the rich guy's goon," someone yelled. "He came to get his accomplices." The situation had become total chaos. Charles managed to scoop Laura into his arms and grab Catherine by the hand, but as they left the apartment, they were met by an even larger crowd. Camera flashes exploded from all sides, questions were shouted, and some people tried to block their path to the van. Laura, what do you have to say about the money?" reporters yelled at a child, who could barely breathe from crying so hard. "Catherine, is it true you planned this whole thing?" they asked a mother who was clearly in a state of shock. Charles forced his way to the van, put Laura and Catherine in the back, and sped off. But as they pulled away, they were followed by at least 5 news vans. "Mum, I want to die," Laura murmured, huddled on the seat. "I want all of this to stop. I want to die." Catherine felt her heart break. Her 10-year-old daughter was talking about death, something that should be far from any child's reality. "Don't say that, my love. Don't you ever say that again." But Laura had completely shut down. She no longer responded, no longer looked up, just rocked back and forth repetitively, lost in her own world of terror and confusion. Charles looked in the rearview mirror and saw they were being followed. Even worse, news helicopters had appeared in the sky, filming the van from above. "Where to, sir?" Charles asked into the phone. Edward was in a total panic. "I don't know, Charles. If you bring them to my house, they'll say I'm kidnapping them. If you take them to a hotel, they'll say I'm hiding evidence. I don't know what to do anymore." And as the van fled through the city streets, pursued by reporters on the ground and in the air, a 10-year-old girl who had only tried to correct a math problem was having her childhood completely destroyed before the eyes of millions of Americans. In the back seat, Catherine tried to shield Laura, but the girl was in a catatonic state. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't reacting to anything. "Laura, honey, talk to me," Catherine pleaded, but there was no response. "Charles, go to the hospital," Edward decided over the phone. Laura needs medical attention. Sir, if we take her to the hospital, it'll turn into an even bigger circus, Charles warned. Catherine felt a new wave of fear. Mr. Miller, if my daughter is admitted, they could use that to say I'm a negligent mother. CPS could take her away from me. Edward knew she was right. Any sign of fragility would be used against them. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Maria. Edward, they just announced on TV that the FBI is going to request a warrant for your arrest tomorrow. The charges include money laundering. An arrest warrant for helping a child. They're building a case where you're the leader of a child exploitation ring. Edward hung up, defeated. In 1 week, he had lost everything. But the worst part was knowing that Laura would continue to suffer. In the van, Laura had stopped rocking. The silence was even more terrifying. Catherine realized her daughter had disconnected from reality. Charles's van had managed to reach the private hospital on the Upper East Side, but the situation there was even worse than on the streets. Dozens of reporters were already waiting at the entrance, and helicopters circled the building. Someone had leaked their destination before they even arrived. Mr. Miller, Charles said over the phone, it's impossible to get in. There's a mob at the hospital entrance. If I get out with Laura in this state, they'll film her being carried in unconscious. It will destroy her. Edward was in total despair. Laura needed urgent medical attention, but any move would be turned into a spectacle. On the other end of the line, he could hear Catherine crying softly, trying to get Laura to respond. Laura, honey, please. Open your eyes, talk to Mommy, Catherine pleaded, but the girl remained motionless, her eyes open but completely vacant. Charles, turn around. Go to Dr. Fisher's house. Call him and tell him it's a medical emergency. Maybe he can see Laura at his home. Sir, if we go to a doctor who's a friend of yours, they'll say you're colluding, that you're forging a medical report. Edward ran his hands over his face, feeling that every attempt to help only made things worse. So, what do you suggest, Charles? That we let a child die to protect our reputations? No, sir, I'm just warning you that whatever we do will be used against us. At that moment, Edward's phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Edward Miller, a gruff male voice asked. Who's speaking? This is FBI Special Agent Mark Davis. Mr. Miller, I'm informing you that the FBI has issued a warrant for your arrest. I recommend you turn yourself in voluntarily within 2 hours, otherwise we will initiate a search operation. Edward felt the blood freeze in his veins. Agent, may I ask what exactly I'm being accused of? Racketeering, money laundering, corruption of a minor, and endangerment. You have 2 hours. The line went dead. Edward collapsed into his armchair, knowing his life was over. In 1 week he had gone from a respected businessman to a criminal wanted by the FBI. Maria burst into his office with a desperate look on her face. Edward, did you hear the news? The agent just called me. I have 2 hours to turn myself in. There's something else you need to know. Child Protective Services is already on their way to get Laura. They received an anonymous tip that Catherine is neglecting her daughter's medical needs to protect you. Edward felt like he was going to faint. Does that mean Laura will be separated from her mother? Edward, they're going to put her in a children's home while they investigate the case. A traumatized child in an overcrowded institution, away from the only person she has in the world. No, Edward murmured. That can't happen. I can't let that happen. In the van, Catherine had realized something serious was happening when she saw police cars approaching. Charles was trying to maneuver to avoid them, but the streets were becoming increasingly congested with media vehicles and onlookers. Charles, what's going on? Catherine asked, clutching Laura to her chest. Ma'am, it looks like CPS is coming for the girl, Charles answered, his voice tense. Coming for her? Why? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to protect my daughter. Catherine hugged Laura even tighter, but the girl remained inert. It was as if she had completely left her own body, leaving only an empty shell behind. Mom, Laura murmured for the first time in hours, but her voice was strange, distant. Laura, honey, can you hear Mommy? Mom, why does everyone want to hurt us? What did we do that was so bad? Catherine began to sob uncontrollably. How could she explain to a 10-year-old that the world was unjust, that people could be cruel for no reason, that sometimes doing the right thing resulted in the worst possible punishment. We didn't do anything wrong, my love. The people are wrong, not us. Then why are they winning? Why are we running away? Laura's question was like a blade to Catherine's heart. How could she explain that sometimes the innocent pay for the mistakes of others? That the world isn't always fair to those who most deserve kindness? At that moment, Charles received a call from Edward. "Charles, change of plans. Don't go anywhere. Come to my house now." "Mr. Miller, but didn't you say that would be interpreted as—" "I don't care about interpretations anymore, Charles. In 2 hours, I'm going to be arrested. Before that happens, I need to make sure Laura is safe." "And how do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet, but I have to try. Bring them here." Charles hung up and looked in the rearview mirror. Catherine was staring at him with eyes red from crying, holding Laura as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Mom, we're going to Mr. Miller's house. What if they arrest us there? What if they separate me and Laura?" "I don't know, Mom, but I think it's better for us to be together when it happens than separated and lost." The drive to Edward's house was a nightmare. They were followed by a caravan of reporters, onlookers, and now police cars as well. What had started as a simple math correction had turned into a high-speed chase worthy of an action movie. When they reached the gate of Edward's mansion, the situation was completely out of control. Hundreds of people were crowded on the street, shouting contradictory slogans. Some defended Edward and Laura, others attacked them fiercely. "Free Laura!" some chanted. "Arrest the criminals!" Others yelled. "Justice for the children!" was the general chorus. But no one knew exactly what justice they were demanding. Charles managed to get through the electronic gate, but not before they were bombarded by camera flashes and deafening shouts. Laura, who had shown signs of improvement in the van, reverted to her catatonic state as soon as she heard the crowd. Edward was waiting at the entrance of the house, supported by Maria. When he saw Laura being carried by Charles, a 10-year-old girl completely psychologically broken, he felt he had hit rock bottom. "My God," he murmured, "what have I done to you?" Catherine looked at Edward with an expression that mixed desperation, anger, and pleading. "Mr. Miller, you promised you would help us, but with every passing day, our lives get worse. My daughter is like this because of this whole mess. How are you going to fix this?" Edward had no answer. For the first time in his life, the man who had always known how to solve problems with logic and money was completely lost. And time was running out. In less than 2 hours, he would be arrested, and Laura would be handed over to CPS. "Catherine," he said, his voice broken, "I don't know how to fix it, but I promise I will try until the very last second." Outside, the crowd grew more agitated, and worst of all, in the midst of all the chaos, a 10-year-old girl was paying the highest price for a simple act of kindness. Maria approached with her phone, her face pale. "Edward, they just released an edited video of Laura online. They cut it to make it look like she's being kidnapped. The video already has 2 million views." Edward sat down heavily. 2 million people watching a lie. Even worse, the comments are split between people calling for your arrest and others creating theories that Laura is a hired actress. Catherine felt her legs give way. "An actress? My daughter is 10 years old." Laura, lying on the couch, began to murmur. "The numbers don't lie, but people lie about the numbers." Edward knelt beside her. "Laura, can you hear me?" "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to help with the math. Why did everyone get so mad?" Edward's heart shattered. "You didn't do anything wrong, Laura. The people are wrong." "Then why are they winning?" The question echoed through the room. Edward had no answer. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Maria answered and her face went pale. "Edward, it's agents from Child Protective Services. They're here to take Laura." "No!" Catherine screamed, grabbing her daughter. "They are not taking my daughter from me." Laura looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. "Mum, are they going to take me away from you?" Edward knew that resistance was futile. The agents had the law on their side. "Catherine, let me talk to them. Maybe I can negotiate something." "Negotiate what? My daughter's life?" Outside, the sirens of the FBI began to wail. Time was up. Edward would be arrested, and Laura would be taken to an institution. The girl who had only tried to correct a math error was about to be separated from her mother, while the man who had tried to help her would be arrested as a criminal. The FBI agents didn't even wait for Edward to finish his goodbyes. At 8 a.m. sharp, they broke down the gate to his house in an operation that seemed more suited for capturing an international drug lord than a businessman accused of helping a child. "Edward Miller, you're under arrest," announced Agent Mark Davis, displaying the metal handcuffs like trophies. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Edward didn't even try to resist. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, he felt his life had come to an end. At 52 blind, he would be thrown in a prison like a common criminal. "Can I at least say goodbye to the girl?" Edward asked, his voice broken. "There's no time for that," the agent replied coldly. "Besides, considering the endangerment charges, it's best you stay away from her." At the same moment, agents from Child Protective Services entered through the back door. The coordination between the two agencies was no coincidence. It had all been planned to happen simultaneously, creating the maximum possible media impact. Laura was huddled on the couch when she saw the uniforms approaching. Her small body began to tremble violently, and she clung to Catherine's legs in desperation. "Mom, don't let them take me, please. I promise I'll never talk to anyone again. I promise I'll be quiet." Catherine hugged her daughter tightly, but she knew it was useless. The agents had a court order, and any resistance would only make things worse. "Laura Smith?" asked the social worker, Marcia Johnson, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. "You're coming with us. It's for your own good." "No!" Laura screamed, hiding behind her mother. "I don't want to go. I didn't do anything wrong." "No one said you did anything wrong," Marcia replied, with false kindness. "But your mother is unable to properly care for you right now. You need help." A rage grew in Catherine's chest. "What do you mean I can't take care of my daughter? I've always taken care of her. Always." "Miss Smith, the child is clearly traumatized. She needs specialized psychological care, something you cannot provide." "Then help me get that care. Why do you have to take her away from me?" Catherine's question echoed through the room, but no one answered. The truth was that separating Laura from her mother would create a bigger spectacle, feed public curiosity, and generate more ratings for the news channels. Edward, being led away by the federal agents, could hear Laura's screams as she was separated from her mother. The sound broke his heart like a blade. "Please," he begged the agent, "let them stay together. The girl has suffered enough." "Mr. Miller, you're being arrested for crimes against a minor. Your opinion on this child's welfare is not relevant." Outside, the cameras captured everything. Edward being placed in the FBI vehicle, handcuffed, his head bowed. Laura being carried away by force by the CPS agents, screaming and struggling like a wounded animal. Catherine falling to her knees on the ground, powerless to protect her daughter. The images went viral in minutes. But, depending on the media outlet, they were given completely different interpretations. For some, it was the image of a terrible injustice being committed against innocents. For others, it was justice finally being served against grifters who had deceived the entire country. In the CPS van, Laura was in a total panic. She screamed, kicked, tried to open the doors and begged to be taken back to her mother. Marcia Johnson tried to calm her with sedatives, but Laura refused to take anything. "Where are you taking me?" Laura asked between sobs. "To a safe place where you'll receive proper care." "I want my mom. I want my mom." "Your mother needs help too, Laura. You'll see each other again when she's better." It was a lie, and Laura knew it. Even at just 10 years old, she was too smart to believe false promises. She understood she had been separated from her mother because of the money, because of the chaos that had been created, because of adults who had turned her attempt to help into a horror show. In the police car, Edward was silent. Every sound was a reminder that his life was over. But what tormented him most was knowing that Laura was suffering because of him. "Agent, what exactly is the evidence against me, besides the bank transfer?" The agent hesitated. "There's a pattern in your donations that suggests something beyond philanthropy." "What kind of pattern?" "Always to families with children, always large amounts, always followed by personal meetings." Edward felt a surge of outrage. I've always donated to families in need, and of course I met the families. I wanted to know who I was helping. When you put that information together, it forms a suspicious picture. A suspicious picture of kindness, of trying to help those in need, of using your position to get inappropriately close to minors. Edward felt sick. How do you turn charity into a crime? In truth, Edward knew it wasn't about the facts. It was about media pressure, the need to find a villain. He had become the perfect scapegoat. Meanwhile, Laura was being taken to St. Hope's Shelter, a children's home on the outskirts of the city. The place was clean and organized, but cold like a hospital. There were other children there, but they all seemed to have lost something essential of their humanity, the sparkle in their eyes, the hope for the future. "Laura," said Marcia Johnson, "this will be your temporary home. The other children will help you adjust." "I don't want to adjust, I want to leave." "That's not possible right now. Your mother first needs to prove she can take proper care of you." "How is she going to prove that if you won't let her try?" Laura's question left Marcia speechless. The cruel logic of the system was exactly that. First, they separated families, then they demanded they prove they were capable of being together. That night, Edward was in an FBI holding cell, lying on a concrete slab, listening to the sounds of the jail. Across the city, Laura was in a single bed in an institution, surrounded by unknown children, crying softly so as not to disturb anyone. Catherine was alone in her empty apartment, holding the only toy Laura had left behind, a worn-out teddy bear she had gotten when she was 5. 3 people who a week earlier had been strangers to one another now shared the same suffering, the same sense of injustice, the same despair, and outside millions of people continued to watch the spectacle, arguing about who was right or wrong, without realizing that they were all victims of a system that turned human tragedies into entertainment. Robert, the assistant who had filmed the first encounter in the park, was in his apartment staring at his computer. He had received dozens of calls offering huge sums for the original video. $50,000 for the full video, a TV producer had said. Robert knew that money would change his life. As an assistant, he didn't make much. But every time he looked at the video, he saw Laura's innocence, Edward's surprise, the simplicity of a moment that should have been just that. Simple. He had created this monster. His impulsive post had destroyed 3 lives. "Robert, are you going to take the offer?" his girlfriend asked. Robert was remembering Laura's face as she was carried away by the agents. His phone rang again. "Robert, last offer, $70,000. I need an answer now." "And if I don't sell?" "Then we'll get it another way. You'll get nothing." Robert hung up and looked at the screen. There was the file that could save Edward and Laura. The original video showed the spontaneity of the encounter. If you could choose between making $70,000 or saving an innocent child, what would you do? He asked his girlfriend. "You have something that can help that girl, Laura?" Robert nodded. "Then there's nothing to think about. An innocent child doesn't deserve to pay for something she didn't do." Robert made the decision that would change everything. Instead of selling the video, he would post the full unedited version for free, with an explanation of how it all happened. At 2 in the morning, he posted, "My name is Robert, and I am responsible for this whole tragedy. It's time to tell the truth." By sunrise, the video had been viewed by over 5 million people. For the first time, public opinion began to shift. Robert's video had spread across the internet like a virus. Within 12 hours, it was the most talked-about topic in the country. For the first time, people could see the truth without filters, without biased editing. The original video clearly showed Laura sitting alone on the bench, eating a simple roll while Edward spoke on the phone about numbers she could overhear. There was no staging, no prior arrangement, nothing but a smart child correcting a math error. But for Edward, who woke up that morning in an FBI holding cell, the shift in public opinion came too late. He had spent the night awake thinking about Laura. "Miller," a guard shouted, "you have a visitor." It was Maria, who had managed to get permission to see him. When she entered, Edward could tell she had been crying. "Edward, have you seen the news? Robert's video changed everything." "Maria, that doesn't change anything. I'm still in jail. Laura is still in an institution. and Catherine is still desperate. Edward, there are protests demanding your release. Famous lawyers are offering to defend you for free. Edward shook his head. Maria, the same people defending me now are the ones who condemned me 3 days ago. Public opinion is fickle. Edward, you have to have hope. For Laura, for Catherine, for yourself. But Edward had lost hope. 3 nights in a cell had changed him. He had seen how the system treated the less fortunate, how justice could be arbitrary, how a person's life could be destroyed by malicious interpretations. On the other side of the city, Laura was sitting on a narrow bed at St. Hope's shelter, looking out a barred window at a grey inner courtyard. There were 12 other children in the dormitory, but she spoke to none of them. Since her arrival, she had only said the bare minimum. Laura, said Marcia Johnson, approaching the bed, some people from TV want to talk to you. They want to hear your side of the story. Laura turned her face to the wall. I don't want to talk to anyone. Laura, this could be a chance for you to tell the truth, for people to understand you did nothing wrong. I already told the truth. Nobody believed me. Why would they believe me now? Marcia sighed. It was impossible to argue with the cruel logic of a 10-year-old who had lost faith in adults. Your mother is trying to get you back. She's hired a lawyer. For the first time in days, Laura showed a reaction. Her eyes filled with tears. My mom got money for a lawyer? Some people who saw Robert's video organized to help you. There's an online campaign to raise funds for your defense. Laura closed her eyes, trying to process the information. Strangers on the internet were helping her family, while the government that was supposed to protect her had separated her from her mother. When can I go home? I don't know yet, Laura. These things take time, but your mother won't give up on you. Meanwhile, Catherine was in a law office in the city centre. The lawyer, Andrew Reed, had offered to represent the family pro bono after seeing Robert's video. He was young, idealistic, and outraged by the situation. Mrs. Smith, Andrew explained, your case is more complex than it seems. It's not enough to prove innocence. We need to prove that the state acted improperly by separating you. Sir, I just want my daughter back. Laura has never been away from me for even 1 night. She must be terrified. I understand, and we'll do everything we can to speed up the process, but I need you to understand. The system doesn't like to admit its mistakes. They will fight to uphold the decision, even if they know they're wrong. Catherine began to cry. Why did they do this to us? We never asked anyone for anything. Laura just tried to help a man with a calculation. Mrs. Smith, sometimes doing the right thing at the wrong time can look like doing the wrong thing. You did nothing wrong, but the timing was unfortunate. Timing. Sir, my daughter doesn't have time. Every day she spends away from me is a day of her childhood she's losing. Andrew knew Catherine was right. Laura was at a crucial age, and the trauma of being separated from her mother could leave permanent scars. That same day, something unexpected happened. Dr. Robert Fisher, the doctor who had treated Edward years ago during his recovery from the accident, decided to speak out. He had been following the situation in the news and could no longer remain silent. In an impromptu press conference outside his office, Dr. Fisher said, I met Edward Miller 8 years ago when he was recovering from the accident that took his sight. He was a devastated man who had lost not only his vision, but also his wife. During months of treatment, I saw how he fought to rebuild his life, how he dedicated himself to helping others going through similar hardships. The doctor paused, clearly emotional. The accusations against Edward Miller are not only false but offensive. I know few men with as much integrity as he has. What is happening is a persecution based on prejudice against the visually impaired and against successful people who choose to help the less fortunate. Dr. Fisher's words were like a bombshell in the court of public opinion. A respected doctor with no financial interest in the case was publicly defending Edward. But in prison, Edward knew nothing of this. He was lying on the concrete slab trying to imagine how he would explain to Laura, when he saw her again, why adults had created such a mess over a simple act of kindness. What he didn't know was that Laura, at that very moment, was asking herself the same question. Why do adults make simple things so complicated? The next morning something would happen that would change everything once more. But this time the change would come from a place no one expected, from the very heart of the machine that had created this injustice. The judge presiding over the case, Judge Helen Carter, had a daughter the same age as Laura, and when she saw the footage of the girl being carried away by force, she felt something she didn't expect to feel: the pain of a mother watching an innocent child be punished for the mistakes of adults. For the first time in her 20-year career, Judge Carter began to question whether the law was being just, or if it was simply being applied. Meanwhile, on social media, the hashtag #JusticeForLaura had become the top trending topic in the country. Millions were sharing Robert's original video. But for Catherine, this virtual mobilization was just a distant echo. She spent her days walking through the empty apartment, holding Laura's clothes. "My baby must be cold," she would murmur, looking at the small jacket. "She always got cold at night. Who's going to cover her now?" Catherine's pain was visceral. It was as if a part of her body had been torn away. She had stopped eating, spent her nights awake, and had developed a nervous cough. At the institution, Laura had started exhibiting worrying behaviors. She had stopped talking to the other children and spent hours drawing numbers on scraps of paper. "It's the calculations I did that day," she explained to Marcia Johnson. "I'm checking. Them again. If I was wrong, maybe all of this will stop." The response broke Marcia's heart. A child thought she could undo an injustice by redoing math problems. "Laura, you were right. The numbers aren't the problem." "Then why is this happening?" Marcia had no answer. In prison, Edward was facing his demons. The other inmates treated him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Hey, blind man," said Joshua, an inmate in for robbery. "Is it true you're in here for helping a kid?" Edward nodded. "I tried to help, it went wrong." "That's crazy. In my neighborhood, you help a kid, you're a hero. Out here, you're a criminal." Edward had lost 15 pounds in a week. His skin was pale, his eyes dull. Depression had taken hold of him. Laura had developed a ritual. Every day at 3 p.m., when she used to get home from school, she would sit by the window waiting for Catherine to appear. "I'm waiting for my mum. She always comes at 3 o'clock. "Laura, your mother doesn't know where you are." "Then why don't you tell her?" Laura's simple logic left Marcia speechless. That day, the American Bar Association issued a statement calling for a review of the case. The American Medical Association did the same. Children from various schools began to protest, walking out of classrooms with signs, "We want Laura back. Justice for our friend." Dr. Fisher received hundreds of calls from doctors who knew Edward. They all told the same story: a generous man who had helped their institutions without asking for recognition. It was at this moment of mounting pressure that Judge Helen Carter would make the most important decision of her career. On Friday morning, Judge Helen Carter arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. She had spent the entire night rereading Edward and Laura's case file, and for the first time in her 20-year career, she was profoundly questioning a decision she had made. Helen had a 9-year-old daughter, Sophia, just a year younger than Laura. The previous night, Sophia had asked about the case on the news. "Mommy, why can't that girl stay with her mum? Did she do something really bad?" "No, sweetie. She didn't do anything bad." "Then why did the grown-ups take her away from her mommy?" Helen couldn't answer. How could she explain to a 9-year-old that sometimes the justice system makes irreparable mistakes? That morning, she made the bravest decision of her life. She called her clerk and requested an emergency hearing for that afternoon. "Your Honor, that's not standard procedure." "Mark, there are times when procedure must be set aside in the name of justice." Meanwhile, Edward was in his cell, lying in silence. He had completely lost hope. Maria had visited the day before with more news about the public outcry, but he knew that changes in the legal system were slow, bureaucratic. Laura could spend months in an institution before the system admitted its mistake. "Miller," the guard shouted, "get your things. You're going to a hearing." Edward frowned. "What hearing? Nothing was scheduled." "Emergency hearing from the judge. Let's go." On the other side of the city, Marcia Johnson arrived at St. Hope's shelter with a court order that confused her. "Laura," she called to the girl who, like every day at 3 p.m., was sitting by the window waiting for Catherine. "Put on your best clothes. You're leaving." "Where to? Another institution?" I don't know, Laura. The judge wants to see you. Laura felt her heart race. All her life, judges had been distant, almost mythical figures. Now she was going to meet one in person. Marcia, did I do something wrong? No, Laura. Quite the opposite. Catherine was at home when her lawyer, Andrew Reed, called. Mr. Smith, you need to get to the courthouse right away. The judge has scheduled an emergency hearing. This afternoon you might be reunited. Catherine began to tremble. Sir, is this true? Ma'am, I have never seen a judge schedule an emergency hearing to reverse her own decision. At 2 p.m. the courtroom was packed. Edward entered in handcuffs. Laura entered with Marcia Johnson, desperately searching the room. For Catherine. When mother and daughter saw each other, the world stopped. Laura ran toward her mother. Catherine knelt and opened her arms. My baby, my life, Catherine cried. Mommy missed you so much. Mum, I knew you would come get me, Laura sobbed. Judge Helen watched with tears in her eyes. I have called this hearing because I made a grave error. An error that separated an innocent family. A murmur went through the room. After reviewing all the evidence, especially the original video, it is clear that no crime was committed. What occurred was an act of kindness that was maliciously misinterpreted. Mr. Edward Miller, the judge continued, you are hereby released. Laura is to be returned to her mother's care, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Edward felt the handcuffs being removed. Laura ran to him and hugged him. Mr. Miller, thank you for standing up for me, she said softly. Laura, thank you for teaching me that numbers don't lie. But more importantly, thank you for teaching me that doing the right thing is worth it, even when it doesn't seem like it. 6 months later, Edward was at a school in the Bronx, the same neighborhood where Laura lived. The school now bore his name, the Edward Miller Financial Literacy Academy. He had used the controversy to create something positive. Edward had invested in education for low-income children. Class, Edward said to a room full of students, today we're going to learn about percentages, and helping me will be our teaching assistant, Laura. Laura, now 11, had become a teaching assistant. She had learned that her mathematical intelligence should be shared. Professor Miller, Laura said with a smile, I'm going to teach them the same calculation I taught you that day in the park. Edward smiled, and I hope this time no one turns a math lesson into a national incident. The children laughed. The story of Edward and Laura had become a local legend, an example of how doing the right thing always pays off in the end. Catherine, who now worked as the school's coordinator, watched from a distance. Her daughter had grown so much. The painful experience had made her more mature. Laura, Catherine said at the end of the class, do you ever regret talking to Mr. Miller that day? Laura thought for a moment. Mom, if I hadn't said anything, he would have lost $3 million, and this school wouldn't exist today. And you think all the suffering was worth it? Mum, I learned that doing the right thing doesn't mean things will work out right away. Sometimes it hurts a lot first, but in the end it's always worth it. Edward, who was listening from a distance with his gold-finished cane in hand, smiled. Laura had learned in 11 years what many adults never learn, that integrity is priceless. That afternoon, as they left the school together as they always did, Laura asked, Mr. Miller, are you still mad at the people who made us suffer? Edward stopped and thought, Laura, I've learned that being angry at people who hurt us only hurts us more. It's better to use that energy to build something good. Like this school? Like this school. Like our friendship. Like the lesson we showed the world. That a smart child and a kind-hearted adult can change things, even when everything seems lost. Laura smiled and took Edward's hand. Catherine walked beside them. 3 people whom fate had painfully brought together, but who were now a chosen family, built on the values that truly matter, honesty, courage, and the certainty that doing good is always worthwhile. And so at the Edward Miller Financial Literacy Academy, dozens of children learned every day not just math, but the most important lesson of all, that having the courage to do the right thing, even when it seems impossible, is what makes a person truly rich. Robert, now the coordinator of Edward's social projects, frequently visited the school. His decision to reveal the truth had changed everyone's lives. The school had become a symbol in the community. Children who once saw education as just an obligation now ran to their classes. Professor Miller, an 8-year-old girl, said, "Is it true that Professor Laura saved your company just by doing one math problem?" Edward smiled. "It's true. And the most important lesson is, any one of you can make a difference in someone else's life," Laura added. "But remember, doing the right thing is sometimes hard. People might not understand at first, but if you're sure you're doing good, never give up." Catherine, watching from the doorway, felt a surge of pride. Her daughter had become a wise young woman, capable of turning pain into a lesson. That afternoon, the three of them walked through the neighborhood. People greeted them warmly. Edward was no longer seen as the rich guy, but as the man who had brought hope to their children. "You know," Edward said, stopping at the park where it all began, "I used to think my blindness was my greatest limitation. Today I realize it taught me to see with my heart. And I learned that being different isn't a bad thing," Laura said, sitting on the bench. "Being smart is nothing to be ashamed of." Catherine sat between them. "And I learned that a mother can be poor in money but rich in pride." The sun was setting, painting the sky gold. It was the end of another day in the new life they had built, a life based on the certainty that there is always light on the other side for those who don't give up on doing what's right. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward and Laura has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of resilience, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which part resonated with you the most. Was it the first meeting in the park, Catherine's courage in protecting her daughter, or Edward's determination to turn his pain into something positive? Every day, we bring you stories that reveal how one act of kindness can transform lives. Stories that make us believe that doing the right thing is always worth it in the end. We'll see you in the next episode with more emotion and stories that will make you reflect on honesty, courage, and solidarity. Because sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most difficult moments.